A new study finds a 10-year decline in world freedom. As refugees return to Ivory Coast, land title disputes are on the rise. And a movie chronicling Michelle and Barack Obama's first date premieres at the Sundance Film Festival. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. A new study suggests global economic downturns and fear of social unrest has led to increased political repression by authoritarian governments in 2015. Now, the 2015 report published by the non-partisan group Freedom House rated the degree of democratic freedoms in nations around the world. VOA's Chris Simpkins has more on the story.
The civil war in Syria and instability elsewhere in the Middle East made the region one of the worst areas for freedom in the world. The 2015 Freedom House report says 72 countries experienced conflicts, political and economic problems, which fueled a decline in global freedoms for the 10th consecutive year.
We saw that in the various freedoms related to freedom of assembly, freedom of association, rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, really across the board, we saw deterioration in all of those areas.
Research by the Washington-based organization designates 50 countries and territories as not free. The worst offenders, the report says, were places like Syria. Others making the list were the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China, Somalia, North Korea, Uzbekistan, and Eritrea. The report indicates people in those places suffered significant setbacks as authoritarian leaders cracked down on rights activists and other critics. But according to the report, the Middle East and North Africa regions were ranked the worst.
And what we're seeing, particularly in the Middle East, is that a lot of the longtime rulers that have been in place and are even, in some cases, considered Western allies are actually are not stable partners, and continuing to bank on them in the long run, I think, is a really bad bet.
Freedom House says democratic countries pressured by terrorist attacks and the strain caused by unprecedented numbers of migrants also clamped down on civil liberties.
So it's particularly important that in the countries that are facing the biggest challenges, which is almost all of them related to this wave of migration, that they continue to balance the government's duty to protect civilians and to protect national interest with the ongoing maintenance of basic freedoms.
Countries criticized by Freedom House often denounce the group. Russia has called the organization biased and accused it of serving U.S. interests. The report did find that 61 nations recorded progress in efforts to establish greater freedoms and cited Latin America for praise.
One major area was Latin America, and you saw in the past 5 to 10 years that there was a real crackdown on a lot of fundamental rights, and we've seen that trend is now reversing somewhat.
The report suggests the most significant setbacks to global freedom over the last decade have been in the areas of freedom of expression and the rule of law. Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Human Rights Watch, the U.S.-based rights group, has released its annual report, and it says that 2015 was a year of increasing repression across much of Africa. The organization says many African governments, especially in East and Central Africa, imposed new restrictions or pressure on opponents, journalists and rights activists, often to meet electoral goals. It says the worst situation was in Burundi, where government security forces killed scores of demonstrators protesting President Pierre Nkurunziza's decision to run for a third term. The rights group says, quote, the government's relentless crackdown forced most of Burundi's independent journalists and human rights defenders to flee the country due to repeated death threats of prosecution on trumped-up charges and beatings. The report says other countries, including Ethiopia, Angola, Zimbabwe and Swaziland, ignored calls to reform draconian laws and policies meant to repress any potential opposition. We'll have more on the Human Rights Report in the coming days. Well, in East Africa, 5 Kenyan policemen were killed on Tuesday in the coastal county of Lamu after their truck hit an improvised explosive device planted on the road by Al-Shabaab. A regional official says the truck was carrying about 10 police officers. It was the latest in a series of attacks near Kenya's border with Somalia. Al-Shabaab took credit for the attack, but it says it had killed 8 Kenyan soldiers. So far, Kenyan officials have declined to give official statements on that attack. Well, in neighboring South Sudan rebel leader Riek Machar reiterated on Tuesday his complaint that President Salva Kiir's creation of new states is an impediment to ending a 2-year civil war. Machar is calling on outside mediators to reject the president's move. A political dispute between Kiir and Machar, who was once Kiir's deputy, sparked the civil war. Kiir sacked Machar, his longtime rival, as deputy president in 2013, igniting a conflict that has killed thousands of people, driven more than 2 million people from their homes, and sparked fears of famine in the oil-rich nation. The two men signed a power-sharing deal in August of 2015, but both sides have since accused the other of violating the pact with new attacks.
Once you hear that the parties have agreed on a draft of a constitution, and the draft is taken to the Transitional National Assembly, and the Assembly has passed it, the next day I will be in Juba. Because if I went to Juba now, what will I go and do? Complain?
Well, on Monday, the United Nations sanctions panel that monitors the conflict in South Sudan for the Security Council said in an annual report that Machar and Kiir qualified to be sanctioned over atrocities committed in a 2-year civil war. Well, for more on the elusive South Sudan peace effort, Ezekiel Lol Katkuoth, Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the SPLM in opposition, joins me by phone from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Ambassador Katkuoth, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Now, it looks like the peace effort in South Sudan keeps making, a few steps forward and many, many backwards. What is the major impediment right now?
Well, as my chairman, Dr. Riek Machar, said before, it is very clear that President Salva Kiir, creation of 28 states, has created obstacles to peace, and it is violating the agreement.
But Ambassador, this was signed. By the time you signed the peace deal, the power sharing deal, the president had already kind of designated this 28 states. Why did you accept? Why did you sign the peace deal?
No, it's not true. We signed the agreement on the 17th of August, 2015, and President Salva Kiir signed the agreement on the 26th of August, 2015. And the introduction of 28 states was on the 2nd of October, 2015. So the agreement was signed, and then he introduced these 28 states, which is actually clearly violating the agreement that we have signed in August. So we are basically saying the world and the guarantors, especially the IGAD countries, the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission and the UN Secretary General and the UN Security Council, should call for President Salva Kiir to recommit himself to the agreement so that we implement the agreement as it is. Now, the agreement is saying 10 states, and it is saying a transitional government of national unity, which will be shared by all the parties. We have selected our ministries, and they have selected theirs. The next move is to make sure that you translate that agreement into the Constitution, pass it, agree to it, use it as a Constitution to be the supreme law of the land, and then from there, you can have the government of national unity.
Now, there's some people who fear that with this kind of development, your two sides may go back to war. Do you have the same fear?
No, I don't think we are going back to war. The people of South Sudan, they are not ready for war. This war was imposed on all of us. Now, you might have heard that His Excellency Dr. Riek Machar Gurgun went to Kampala to talk to President Museveni. And they were discussing serious issues, which is actually the top of those. What they have discussed is the agreement. We need to make sure that the agreement works, and it has to be implemented. And this is the only way to restore peace and stability in South Sudan, in the region, especially Uganda and Sudan, and the whole region, so that we can have peace and stability. And then from there, the war will be actually on development. How do you develop this region?
You know, we wish you all the best, and we look forward to talking to you again. Ambassador Gatkuoth, thank you very much. Ezekiel Lol Gatkuoth is the Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the SPLM in opposition in South Sudan. Well, now to the European migrant crisis. Polls show support for the anti-immigrant political parties in Germany has risen since the hundreds of attacks on women in Cologne, apparently by groups of migrants. Henry Ridgewell has our report.
Like thousands of other Syrian refugees, Bashir al-Zalan's escape to Germany took him by foot across Turkey and Eastern Europe. He says Germany has offered sanctuary.
Germany for the Syrians was some kind of mother, and at the head of that, Angela Merkel.
Al-Zalan now lives just outside Cologne. The attacks on New Year's Eve, apparently by groups of migrants, prompted him to write newspaper articles apologising on behalf of refugees. He praises the locals' response.
I had fears after the incidents in Cologne, but after then I felt that the people just understand, and they just don't have that kind of strategy that depends on action, on reaction.
But the attacks have had political consequences. One poll showed support for the anti-immigration Alternative for Germany party has risen to an all-time high of 11.5%, putting it in third place. Hendrik Rottmann is head of the party's Cologne branch.
Nun, die Open-Gate-Philosophie von Angela Merkel.
Angela Merkel's open-door philosophy has ensured that we have an unbelievable amount of migration and asylum seekers in Germany, of which some are refugees, but a large portion are unregistered, so we don't know what they're doing here.
Und ein großer Teil davon ist unregistriert im Land, sodass wir nicht wissen, was die hier tun.
1.1 million migrants came to Germany in 2015, and the events that happened here in Cologne on New Year's Eve have hugely intensified the debate over how and even if Germany can integrate so many people. City authorities insist it can be done.
Was den großen Teil der Flüchtlinge angeht, die nach Köln kommen, hier ein neues Leben zu beginnen.
The vast majority of the refugees that come to Cologne want to start a new life and integrate peacefully into our society. That is a lot of work for us, and there is plenty of homework still to do, such as language courses, integration courses, and finding jobs. This is all relatively new to us.
Early next month, hundreds of thousands of people are expected to line Cologne's streets for the annual carnival. Groups of people are already out in costume.
We
are good people and roll with things as they come. We see that more migrants are coming here, and we're approaching it positively. We're not going to let them take away our fun, and we're going to keep being who we are. This is our culture.
Security is being heavily stepped up for the carnival. Cologne's authorities are aware that any further attacks, like those on New Year's Eve, would have an impact far beyond the city streets. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Cologne, Germany.
Well, as the European Union prepares to meet in February to discuss the refugee crisis, calls are growing louder for the tougher border controls. Here's VOA's Jeff Swikert.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who last year opened her country's borders to more than 1 million migrants, is under increasing pressure from other EU members to stop the inflow. But she remains optimistic the situation is manageable.
We must find a level of balance, and we should not become pessimistic too quickly. I still believe that we can manage it. Of course, we must significantly reduce the number of refugees, and we're working to do that.
But time is running out for finding a solution. Border controls like this one at the German-Austrian border near Passau, Germany, were supposed to be temporary measures to help cope with Europe's largest influx of refugees in decades. Passau police spokesman Markus Binderman.
The main purpose of these border controls is fighting illegal entry into the country and people smuggling.
This week, the EU edged closer to suspending the so-called Schengen area. its open border zone for up to 2 years if the flow of migrants fails to slow. Thousands of migrants continue to arrive in Greece, making it more likely the EU will take some form of action when leaders meet in February. Jeff Swycord, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, refugees returning to Ivory Coast have sparked land title disputes. Stay with us to find out more.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
Office workers stream across a bridge into London. And come rain or shine, they're under increasing pressure to respond to emails all day long, says this man.
Just general day-to-day pressure to be available all the time, to answer emails all the time, to perhaps eat into people's leisure time and blur the boundaries between work and leisure.
Psychologists are concerned, especially about the pressure workers can bring on themselves. Dr. Richard McKinnon speaking via Skype.
Checking your email very early in the morning, or checking in at late at night, or leaving your email on all day. That has a much stronger relationship with email pressure. So it's not necessarily about how many emails we receive.
McKinnon says bad email habits are linked to higher levels of stress in office workers. In 2014, over 1 billion people worldwide were using mobile email. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Well, the 2010-2011 political crisis in Ivory Coast forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee to neighboring countries. Most of them left everything behind. When they got back, some found their land occupied by others, leading to clashes and intercommunal tensions. With more refugees still on their way back, the conflict threatens to impede the reconciliation the country has been looking for. VOA's Emily Eob explains.
In this region of Ivory Coast bordering Liberia, lush forest spreads as far as the eye can see. It is one of the most fertile regions in the country, but also one of the most heavily impacted by the political crisis after the 2010 presidential election. Post-election violence led about 300,000 people to flee the country, leaving everything behind. Many of them came from here and fled to Liberia. One refugee was Leontine Mea, who made a living by cultivating her ancestral land. She came back after 2 years in a refugee camp.
When I came back, I went to see my land, and I saw that distant relatives had sold my land, and that other people were occupying it.
Land dispute is not new in Ivory Coast. In some areas, it dates back to the 1980s, but it has blown up in the past few years with the return of the 2010-2011 refugees. In some cases, community members or relatives claimed a right to the land while the refugee was gone and sold it illegally, often to foreigners, leading to serious tension when the landowner came home. The United Nations Refugee Agency, which is helping the returnees readjust, also advises them on the legal procedure to recover the land.
It's happening a lot. It's one of the main issues that we are facing. So we have put in place a mechanism whereby we can follow some, we call it protection monitoring. You cannot have social cohesion when people don't get the rights to be reinstated.
Joël Guéhi also saw his land taken away, but he managed to find a solution thanks to the mediation of the local chief.
We went to see the chief of the village, and he proposed that we do share work. We thought about it and eventually agreed.
Settlements are not always so easy to achieve because most people don't have a land certificate and land boundaries are often blurry. Local authorities, such as the prefectures, are also involved in solving cases.
L'État a pris un décret portant délimitation des territoires villageois.
The state has issued a decree regarding the boundaries of village territories. The state is due to finance it. And I believe that if this operation goes through, it will really decrease the number of conflicts, not only here, but in the whole of Ivory Coast as well.
The stakes in Ivory Coast are high as repatriation of the remaining refugees from Liberia resumed in December, and several thousands are expected to come home in the next few months. Emilia for VOA News in Blodecan.
Well, today we are beginning a new weekly business report on Africa 54, originating from VOA's bureau in New York City. Jill Malandrino is the new host of the segment. And Jill, it's a pleasure to welcome you aboard.
And thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on the team here.
So tell us what you got. Jill, go ahead.
Okay, so the question is Africa's boom over because commodities such as crude oil and gold prices have plummeted? Perhaps Africa's boom is just starting due to tech innovation, particularly in Nigeria and Kenya. The smartphone has been a game changer for the continent as more and more Africans adopt the technology versus using a computer to stay connected, get news, trade stocks, and transfer money. In 2016, it is estimated that the sub-Saharan African population will reach over 1 billion people, the majority of whom will be under 30. And according to McKinsey, 360 million people will be connected via smartphone by 2025. This explosion of innovation leads to opportunity for a continent hampered by traditional methods of growth and development. Expanding the smartphone base and improving technical capabilities in Africa also lends to upstart growth, and the global marketplace is definitely taking notice. One market that has seen tremendous growth since the early 1990s is video on demand and Nollywood, or Nigerian cinema. In fact, Nollywood is the world's second largest film industry in terms of output and employs over 1 million people. India is in the #1 spot, with Hollywood in third. On January 25th, IROC TV, dubbed the Netflix of Africa, one of the largest online streaming services in Nigeria and largest licenser and distributor of Nollywood in the world, announced it secured another round of funding from investors, including France's Canal Plus, bringing the total to $40 million to produce original content across the continent. IROC TV aims to produce 300 hours of original content in 2016 and to double that figure over the next 2 years. The bulk of the new investment will be used for financing of local content and production, as well as product and engineering teams. Less than 1% of Nollywood revenue is captured through official sales and royalties, largely due to DVD pirating. VOD and subscription services like IROC TV present an opportunity to improve distribution and monetization, which in turn could increase production budgets and quality. Content is king in today's media age. That is the mantra, whether a company is an up-and-coming superstar like IROC TV or an established giant like Amazon.com, YouTube, Hulu, and of course, Netflix. And the hot content emerging in media right now is Nollywood. Netflix announced at the Consumer Electronics Show on January 6th that it went live in 130 countries, including several in Africa. Chief Executive Officer Reed Hastings of Netflix said, "Right now you are witnessing the birth of a global TV network. We want citizens of the world to have the same content." Now, is this the obituary for IROC TV? Not even close, as far as Jason Njuko, founder of IROC TV, is concerned. He says, so Netflix being in Nigeria has zero impact on IROCO and our vision for the future. It is Nollywood fanatics, and with those guys, they can watch TV for 3 to 5 hours per day. So IROC TV is still the only place they can find most of what they are looking for. Considering we are one of the biggest actual producers of Nollywood, I don't see that changing anytime soon. In fact, we'll be able to produce 200 movies a year ourselves with no shaking, and the evident collapse of the DVD market, this only makes us stronger. And this is as per Jason's blog that was put out right after the Netflix announcement was made.
So, Jill, great there. And obviously, we can say that, as everybody's now saying, Africa is the next big thing, right? In every
aspect. It absolutely is the big. It is the big thing. And even this morning, the UN put out a study just released today that it expects to see 4.4% growth in Africa, and a majority of that coming from West Africa.
Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you.
All right, that is Jill Malandrino, who's Africa 54's new business correspondent. And be sure to tune in every Wednesday to watch her reports. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, when Barack met Michelle. The Obamas get their own feature film. We'll be right back.
نسجل بأننا نختلف مع ما ذهب إليه في صلاح.
The politics, and then it goes on to say how South Africa's participation in the UN.
في مجتمعاتنا العربية والإسلامية.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. This year's Sundance Film Festival featured two very special cameos from U.S. President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. No, the first couple did not fly Air Force One into Park City, Utah, but they did appear in fictionalized film form in Southside with You, a romance reimagining the couple's first date in Chicago in 1989 as they do or see Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, get ice cream, and attend a community meeting. So what do the Obamas think of the film? Well, the movie's director told the press they are excited and they are also a little baffled by its existence. Well, next up, Banksy is at it again. A piece of art by the street artist has appeared in London opposite the French embassy in Knightsbridge. The work takes a swipe at French authorities for their handling of the migrant crisis in Calais. It shows a girl standing in front of a torn French flag, reminiscent of the image used for musical Les Miserables, weeping with a can of tear gas below her. The artwork includes a quick response code, which, when scanned by a mobile phone, links to a video showing tear gas and rubber bullets being used in a police raid on one of the refugee camps in early January. Well, and finally, the UK government is extending a grants program for electric car buyers in an attempt to get more people to invest in electric vehicles. 8 British towns and cities are taking part in the scheme, which will offer electric cars owners free parking and other incentives. Wholly electric vehicles are still seen as expensive and difficult to use as family cars on long journeys. In 2015, sales of alternatively fueled vehicles rose by 40% from the previous year. They are attractive to some because of free car parking spaces, with a plug-in points being made available. And that is what is trending today.
How much battery you got?
Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to Voice of America's News Words. When you listen to stories about the U.S. government, you often hear this word:
Senate.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate is one of the 2 major groups of lawmakers that make up the U.S. national legislature.
There are 100 senators, 2 from each state. Along with the House of Representatives, they make the nation's laws.
Senators also approve treaties and high-level federal officials. Now, when you hear the word Senate,
your English will be good enough to know what this news word means.